I wasn't supposed to be in court that day. My name is Ava. I'm 16. I was only there to support my friend Maya, who got caught up in some nonsense shoplifting charge. The whole thing was ridiculous. They told us to sit in the gallery quietly, so that's what I did. Hoodie up, phone off, no eye contact. Just waiting. The courtroom was dead silent except for the judge droning on about bond conditions. That's when one of the officers, a thick-necked man with a red face and a twitch in his jaw, turned to me like I had just insulted his ancestors. "You think this is funny?" he barked. I froze. "What? You smirkin'? Get up." Before I could even respond, he grabbed my arm and yanked me up from the bench. The whole room turned. I swear I didn't do anything, I wasn't even looking his way. I didn't even say anything, I stammered, my voice shaking. Then it happened. He slapped me. Hard. In front of everyone. The room gasped. Some lady in the back screamed. The bailiff moved, slowly, like he didn't know what to do. I just stood there, stunned, the left side of my face stinging and hot. "You're not gonna disrespect this court," he snapped, breathing heavy like I'd done something outrageous. And that's when the door creaked open behind him. A woman in a dark navy suit stepped in. Her heels clicked sharply on the courtroom floor. Her badge, real, metallic, and unmistakably federal, flashed as she moved. She looked straight at me. Then she looked at him. Her voice cut through the silence like a razor. "Take your hands off my daughter. Now." The officer's grip loosened immediately. He turned around, confused at first, until his eyes landed on her badge, clipped at her hip like it was born there. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "My name is Special Agent Camille Brooks," she said, her voice low but lethal. "FBI Internal Affairs. And you just laid hands on a minor, in a courtroom, without provocation." The courtroom was still, the air almost too heavy to breathe. You could hear the fluorescent lights buzzing. The officer stammered, she was being disruptive. Camille didn't blink. She was sitting. Quietly. I watched it all from the hallway before I stepped in. I was already here, just late to the bench. That's when the judge, who had been frozen in his chair, finally found his voice. Agent Brooks, I had no idea you didn't know because I wasn't here in any official capacity," she said calmly. "But now I am." She walked up to me without another word to him. Gently touched my chin, turned my face to see the bright red imprint across my cheek. Her jaw tightened. "Go stand by the bailiff," she said softly to me. "Do not move." I obeyed, my legs trembling but steady enough. Then she turned back toward the cop. "Badge number. Full name. Now." He swallowed hard. "This is a misunderstanding. Badge number." Another officer in the back, one who had stayed silent until now, quietly stepped forward. "Sergeant Thomas Kelleher. Badge 14219. Camille gave a small nod. "You'll be relieved of duty as of now. Leave your weapon and ID with the bailiff. I'll handle the rest." The judge stood. "Agent Brooks, with all due respect," she turned toward him. "Judge Morgan, if you say one more word without addressing the fact that your courtroom just became the scene of an assault, you'll be answering questions at the bureau too." He sat down. Fast. Sergeant Kelleher stood frozen for a second, like his brain couldn't process what was happening. He glanced around the room, hoping someone, anyone, might step in and save him. But no one moved. Not the judge. Not the clerk. Not the other officers. Camille didn't flinch. "The weapon, Sergeant." With slow, robotic movements, he unlatched his duty belt and removed his sidearm. Then his badge. He handed both over to the bailiff, whose hands were visibly shaking as he took them. You can wait in the lobby until an investigator escorts you, Camille said coldly. He opened his mouth as if to argue, then thought better of it. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the courtroom, all the weight of what just happened dragging behind him. Camille turned back toward the judge. I'd like the court reporter to read back the last 10 minutes of this hearing. Every word. The judge nodded stiffly. And once that transcript is ready, she continued, a copy will be going to the Bureau's Office of Professional Responsibility, the U.S. Attorney's Office, and the DOJ Civil Division. The silence was suffocating. Camille finally looked at me again. You okay, baby? I nodded, blinking back the tears that had started to form now that the adrenaline was wearing off. She reached out, gently took my hand, and held it tight. Then she looked back at the courtroom and said, let this be a lesson, power without restraint is not power, it's weakness. And I don't tolerate weakness around my child. Camille turned back to the judge, her tone now clipped and professional. I assume this court intends to continue the hearing for Miss Carter, she asked, gesturing toward Maya, who sat pale and wide-eyed at the defense table. Judge Morgan cleared his throat. Yes, we'll proceed. Good, Camille replied. Because we're not done here. Not even close. She led me gently to a seat in the front row, beside Maya's mother, who had her hand clamped over her mouth, stunned. I sat down, heart pounding, my face still throbbing. Camille didn't sit. She stood along the back wall now, arms crossed, watching the room like a hawk. Whatever fear had ruled that courtroom before, it had shifted. And everyone knew it. When the judge fumbled to resume Maya's hearing, his voice shook. Even the prosecutor seemed uncertain, like he was suddenly aware that every word was being mentally recorded by someone far above his pay grade. As the hearing continued, Camille took out her phone, not to scroll, not to text. She opened her notes app, and began typing. Every detail. Every action. Every name. This wasn't going to disappear. She wasn't letting it. The hearing limped forward. Maya's lawyer, now emboldened by Camille's presence, pushed harder than before. He questioned everything, the footage, the arrest, even the validity of the store manager's statement. And for the first time, the judge didn't cut him off. When it was over, Maya was released with no charges. The evidence was weak, always had been, but now, with Camille in the room, the court treated it like it should have from the start. As we stepped into the hallway, the press had already gathered. Someone had clearly tipped them off. Cameras. Microphones. Flashes. Camille didn't flinch. A reporter called out, Agent Brooks. Is it true your daughter was assaulted in open court? Camille stopped. She looked directly into the lens of the nearest camera. My daughter is a child. She was slapped by a uniformed officer, in a courtroom, while following the rules. That officer has been removed and will be held accountable. Another reporter asked, are charges being filed? Camille's jaw tightened. You can assume that's underway. Then she turned to me. You ready to speak? She asked softly. I hesitated, then nodded. She stepped aside and let me stand at the microphone. I took a breath. I didn't do anything wrong. I was just sitting there. He hit me like I wasn't even human. But now, I want other kids to know that if this ever happens to them, they're not alone. Camille gently placed a hand on my back. Support. Protection. Power. That clip of me speaking hit social media within the hour. By the next morning, it was everywhere, news stations, timelines, headlines. Teen assaulted in courtroom, FBI agent mother takes action. People had opinions. Some called it abuse. Some called it bravery. But no one could ignore it. Within 2 days, Camille was summoned to Washington for a closed-door meeting. Not for discipline, for coordination. A full inquiry was launched into that precinct's courtroom conduct. Not just Kelleher, all of them. That courtroom had silenced a lot of people over the years. But not this time. Back home, I stayed out of school for a few days. Camille didn't make me, I just couldn't face the whispers yet. But the doorbell never stopped ringing. Neighbors. Reporters. Lawyers. Even people we didn't know, families from other towns, saying it had happened to them too. Camille told me, what he did to you wasn't about just one moment. It's a symptom. And now the infection's out in the open. She meant it. Because she didn't stop after the press conference. She called in favors. She reopened cases. She started visiting courtrooms without announcing herself, just showing up, sitting in the gallery, watching. They never knew who she'd show up for next. Camille didn't need flashing lights or loud speeches. She was the kind of storm that arrived silently, and changed everything by the time it left. A week after the incident, Sergeant Kelleher's name appeared in a public disciplinary report. He had a history, complaints buried, witnesses ignored. Nobody had ever looked too closely. Until now. Camille made sure every one of those cases got pulled. She didn't speak to the press again. She didn't need to. The message had already been sent, accountability was no longer optional. Meanwhile, I started getting letters. From kids. Parents. People who had sat in courtrooms just like I had. Some had been talked down to. Some had been yanked by the arm. Some had been humiliated. And all of them thought no one would believe them. But now, they did. I read them late at night, one after another. Some made me cry. Some made me mad. All of them made me realize something I hadn't seen before, that slap. It wasn't just about me. It was about who they thought they could touch without consequence. And that part was over. 2 weeks later, Camille received a formal invitation, not a request, to speak at a statewide law enforcement oversight panel. She brought me with her. It wasn't just a hearing. It was a reckoning. A dozen officials sat behind a long desk. Some in suits, others in uniform. Cameras recorded from every angle. They expected Camille to give a speech, maybe offer policy advice. She didn't do any of that. Instead, she turned to me. "Go ahead," she whispered. My throat was dry, but I stood. "I wasn't going to say anything," I began. "But if I don't, someone else like me will be next." I told them everything, how it felt when someone in a badge decided I didn't matter. How no one moved to stop it. How that courtroom, meant for justice, felt like a cage. And how it only changed because someone walked in who had power, and used it. When I finished, the room was silent. Even the men in uniform looked down at their hands. Camille stood beside me. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She just said, "Now imagine how many kids never had someone walk in." And with that, we left. The fallout kept spreading, not from chaos, but from change. By the end of the month, a statewide task force was formed. Camille wasn't just on it, she was leading it. Quietly, strategically, relentlessly. Policies were rewritten. Courtroom procedures were reviewed. Every officer assigned to juvenile hearings was required to undergo advanced training, not just once, but yearly. Camille called it proactive repair. She said, fixing a broken system means more than punishing the wrongdoers. It means building something better where they used to stand. As for me, I went back to school. People looked at me differently now. Some with admiration. Some with guilt. But I didn't let it change me. What happened in that courtroom would always be a scar. But it was no longer an open wound. I started helping Camille review letters from other families. Sometimes I even called them, just to say, "I believe you." Because I knew now what silence allowed. And I wasn't staying silent anymore. Months passed. The story faded from the headlines, but the effects didn't. That courtroom now had cameras installed. Officers were rotated more frequently. And most importantly, people watched. Camille kept working, but she also slowed down just enough to be home for dinner more often. She said she didn't want her job to become the only thing I remembered her for. I told her I'd remember that day forever, not because of what he did, but because of what she did. One afternoon, we got a package. No return address. Inside was a single folded note. I resigned. Not because I was forced. But because your daughter made me realize what I became. I hope she never forgets the power she holds. I never will. T.K. Camille stared at it for a long time. Then quietly placed it in a folder labeled unfinished. She didn't forgive him. But she acknowledged the weight of it. As for me, I started writing, not just journals, but essays, letters, even articles. Camille said my voice reached places even her badge couldn't. And now, when I walk into a room, people don't see a victim. They see a girl who stood up, because her mother walked in. And never backed down. A year later, I stood in front of a new crowd. This time, not in a courtroom, but at a high school assembly. Mine. I'd been invited to speak during a civic leadership event. Students packed the auditorium. Some knew me as the girl from the courtroom video. Others only knew that someone their age had taken on the system, and left a dent. I stood behind the podium, took a deep breath, and looked out at them. My name is Ava Brooks, I said. You may have heard about what happened to me. But this story isn't just mine. I paused. It's about what happens when adults forget their purpose. When silence becomes survival. And when someone finally decides to say, enough. A few heads nodded. Phones were out, recording. I didn't mind. My mom always told me, courage is contagious. I didn't understand what that meant until she walked into that courtroom. I smiled then, not out of pain, but pride. She didn't just save me. She made sure I could save someone else next time. After the assembly, students came up to me one by one. Telling me their stories. Asking how they could help. Asking how they could start. And that was when I realized. The slap didn't define me. The silence didn't break me. And the system didn't win. Because I was still here. And I was still speaking. Camille never stopped watching. One crisp morning, about 13 months after it all began, she got an encrypted call from a contact in another city. A similar incident. A different courtroom. A teenage boy this time, bruised, humiliated, and no one believed him. The officer claimed self-defense. There was no footage. No witnesses who dared speak up. Except one. A court clerk. Anonymous for now. Camille looked at me as she packed her bag. You okay if I go? I nodded. Go get them. She paused at the door. You coming with me next time? That stopped me. I thought about it, the long days, the hard conversations, the things I'd have to see. But also the ones I could protect. I stood up and said, yeah. Just say when. Because something had changed in both of us. Camille was no longer just a mother who defended her daughter. And I was no longer just the girl in the headline. We were a team now. And this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something bigger. The new city had a different rhythm, colder light, older buildings, and thicker silence in the courtrooms. But Camille moved through it like she'd lived there her whole life. She met with the whistleblower in an empty parking garage, just like the old days from her fieldwork. The court clerk was young, maybe late 20s, hands shaking as she handed over a file folder. He said no one would believe me, she whispered. They never do. Camille took the folder and said only 4 words, you did the right thing. Inside were handwritten notes, times, names, and patterns, subtle ones. Certain officers always posted to the same juvenile cases. Certain judges looked the other way. The boy in this case. He'd been targeted the moment he walked through the courtroom doors. Camille didn't storm in. She never did. She asked for official access, citing federal oversight. She knew how to make pressure feel polite. And she asked one more thing, that the boy's hearing be moved to a courtroom with public seating. So she and I could attend. When the day came, we sat quietly in the back row. The boy looked confused when he saw us, until Camille gave a slight nod. The same officer who'd hurt him stepped forward, all authority and confidence. Until he caught sight of Camille's badge. And then of me. I made sure he saw my face. Because now, we were watching. And this time, no one was walking out without consequences. The officer, Detective Halverson, hesitated at the stand. Not for long. Just enough for the courtroom to notice. He straightened his posture, cleared his throat, and tried to speak with the same force he always had. But his words didn't land the same way. Not with Camille seated 3 rows back, pen in hand. Not with me sitting beside her, recording every second. And not with the judge glancing at Camille's credentials, visibly nervous. The boy, Marcus, was barely 15. He looked small in that courtroom chair, wrists clenched, eyes low. But when Camille stood, unprompted, and handed a sealed document to the bailiff, everything changed. Your Honor, she said calmly, this file contains corroborated misconduct reports involving Officer Halverson across 4 separate hearings over the past year. Each includes similar accusations. Each dismissed. Until now. The courtroom fell still. The judge flipped open the folder, scanning quickly. His face paled. Halverson sputtered. You can't just, this is a courtroom, not a federal trial. Camille tilted her head. Then perhaps you forgot who's in your courtroom. She stepped forward, slowly, deliberately, and placed her FBI identification on the witness podium. I've been quiet long enough. This isn't about headlines or speeches. This is about a boy who walked in here expecting fairness, and got fear. She turned to Marcus. You're not invisible. Not anymore. His eyes welled, but he nodded. And at that moment, everyone in that courtroom, from the judge to the clerk to the officer, knew, this was no longer business as usual. This was a reckoning. By the time the gavel came down, the energy in the room had shifted. The judge ordered a recess. Then a full review of the officer's past cases. And finally, something no one expected, a formal apology to Marcus, on record. It wasn't just symbolic. It was accountability, spoken aloud in a courtroom that had silenced too many. Detective Halverson was escorted out of the building under administrative review. Camille didn't celebrate. She just walked over to Marcus, knelt to his level, and said, You changed something today. You held the line. He whispered, I thought I was alone. She shook her head. You were never alone. The difference now is, people are watching. That night, we rode the train back home. Quiet. Tired. But proud. I looked at Camille, her eyes closed, head resting lightly against the window. The strongest person I knew, not just because of her badge, but because she never let power become the point. She made it the tool. And I understood now what she'd been building. Not a campaign. Not a headline. But a standard. Something other people could follow long after we were gone. When we got home, she placed a new folder on the shelf beside the one labeled unfinished. This one had a name too, Ongoing. Because as long as the doors kept opening, and kids kept walking through them hoping someone would see them, Camille Brooks would be watching. And now. So would I.